And this is the sermon recap for Proper 24, the year B, the year of Mark, preached at University Lutheran in Eau Claire, Wisconsin on October 21st, the year 2012. The sermon recap will be, again, a bit different. The sermon yesterday was so particular to our own setting, to our own ministry, that I will kind of back up and away from that a little bit and talk about kind of in bigger general terms what the sermon was hoping to say to a very specific people. The text, we continue in the Gospel of Mark, the 10th chapter. James and John, Zebedee's sons, came up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we want you to grant us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. "Grant us," they say, "that when you're there in all your glory, one of us will sit at your right and the other at your left." "You don't know what you're asking for," Jesus replied. "Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? Can you receive the baptism I'm going to receive?" "Yes," they said, "we can." "Well," said Jesus, "you will drink the cup I will drink. You will receive the baptism I will receive. But sitting at my right hand or my left, that's not up to me. It's been assigned already." When the other 10 disciples heard this, they were angry with James and John. Jesus called them and said, "You know how it is with the pagan nations," he said. "Think how their so-called rulers act. They lord it over their subjects. The high and mighty ones boss the rest around. But that's not how it's going to be with you. Anyone who wants to be great among you must become your servant. Anyone who wants to be first must be everyone's slave. Don't you see the Son of Man didn't come to be waited on. He came to be the servant, to give his life as a ransom for many." This is at the end of Mark chapter 10. Jesus has just predicted for the third time, the last time in the Gospel of Mark, his suffering prediction. The Son of Man is going to Jerusalem to suffer and to die at the hands of the scribes and the Pharisees. And immediately after this text, we get the healing of the blind Bartimaeus, which will be next week's text. And then Jesus in Mark 11 goes into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry in Mark. We had a college, or not a college student, a young man recently out of college who's returned to Eau Claire to begin his profession, who asked to be confirmed, who asked to make affirmation of baptism. He hadn't done that in his life, and so the last number of weeks, he and I have been working on Luther's Small Catechism, and so that was certainly part of the service yesterday. And so I talked about the glory from which, the preposition there being very important, the glory from which baptism comes and clings is reciting some of Luther's Small Catechism, that we say that we believe that Jesus Christ, true God, begotten of the Father from all eternity, and true human being, born of the Virgin Mary, is my Lord, at great cost. He's redeemed me, a lost and condemned person, not with silver or gold, but with his holy and precious blood, his innocent suffering, his death, so that I may be his own, belong to him, and live under him in his kingdom. And yet we say, in the third article of the Creed, I believe that I cannot believe by my own power, by my own understanding, by my own effort. I can't believe Jesus Christ is my Lord, but the Holy Spirit calls, gathers, and enlightens me, calls, gathers, and enlightens the church, and with the gifts of the Spirit keeps us united in the one true faith. That's the glory from which our faith and baptism clings and comes. But then to make a transition into the ministry of our place, the glory to which the glory toward which our faith and our baptism moves is in the context of the people of God where you're at. And in our case, it has to do with students, and it has to do with the ministry, the ordinary day in and day life of the campus. And that if we're not careful, somehow we can miss that. If we're not careful in how we do things and what we do and how we give and how we treat one another, then we can miss that. And that was kind of my final point, also again very personal, that it's not a great theologically supported piece, but in the text Jesus says that place has been prepared. James and John want to sit on the left and right, and Jesus says that spot has already been prepared for some. And so I simply said that the fact that God prepares ministry for us in baptism, the fact that God prepares ministry for us in any given place, doesn't mean finally that we get around to doing it. And so the ministry of all of us, prepared by God, it belongs to God, and yet sometimes we're so careless with how we treat one another, how we treat people within the church, outside the church, how we treat one another in our comings and goings, that we can say Jesus, Jesus, Jesus all the day long. But in the end, all that people will see are James and John arguing about the highest and best seats in the house. And so I don't think it's coincidence, again, for Mark, that the last text is the healing of a blind man, Bartimaeus. This section beginning with the healing of a blind man, this section ending with the healing of a blind man, that Mark is trying to drive home the point that so often James, John, and Peter and the rest of us, even though we're very close to the Jesus, to the Christ, that we don't see what we ought to see. And so finally, healing comes, salvation comes, saving comes in our being healed of our blindness. Christ has prepared for us at University Lutheran a very specific, marvelous, mysterious ministry to students and to non-students. It's a gracious gift. Christ in the church, the baptized everywhere, has prepared for all of us as brothers and sisters with one another, as disciples of Jesus Christ, has prepared ministry. And yet I know personally, and I've heard otherwise, all sorts of places where the saints, where the disciples of Jesus, do not treat one another very well at all, and don't treat outsiders very well at all. And so it's no wonder that people cannot see. Christ prepares. The glory from which our baptisms, our faith cling, is the glory of the Christ. I believe that Jesus Christ is true God, true human being, born of the Virgin Mary, is my Lord. The glory to which we are called, toward which we move, baptism and faith, is in loving and forgiving and upholding one another. Grace to you and peace in all things.